Thanks so much for being with us today. To conclude our day together here, we are going to have a panel that looks towards the future of cybersecurity. It's my honor to introduce them to you. We have begun the day with a call for a new paradigm for cybersecurity, delved into the threat, dove into the implementation of zero trust, and now we'll conclude with an examination of the future of cybersecurity in a wonderful fireside chat. This fireside chat is pre-recorded on April 13th. It will be led by John D. Simone, the Vice President of Cybersecurity Training and Services for Raytheon Intelligence and Space. He will interview Brandon Wales, the Acting Director for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency at the Department of Homeland Security. John, we thank you so much to you and your amazing team for making today's event possible and for your huge support for this groundbreaking summit. Now, over to you.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate that. Brandon, very excited for the opportunity to speak with you today and listen to the insights that you have on one of the most important topics that we have as a country. To jump in, I know there's a lot of mainstream news on cyber lately, a lot of shifts in the policy and priorities in the early days of the Biden administration. I know you've been thinking a lot about what the future of cyber and cyber policy looks like. Can you share some of your perspective on the long-term future?
Sure, John, and thank you and to Tom for hosting this event. I think anytime that the community can get together and talk about new ways of looking at the challenges that we all face, the better we can all be. When it comes to the future of cybersecurity, I think about things along three primary axes. The first is we need to move to more defensible architectures. And I think you had conversations earlier today about the move to zero trust. That's a long-term goal. And I think the question is, how are we going to make steady progress with the goal of reaching towards zero trust architectures? Secondly, I think we need more effective governance around cybersecurity. That's certainly true in the federal government, where we need to operate more as an enterprise and less as 102 disparate federal civilian executive branch agencies. And finally, I think we need to look at more nimble programmatics that will allow us to adapt our cybersecurity approaches as the threat and risk environment evolves. I think when you think about how large-scale government programs operate, they're hard to get into and they're even harder to get out of. And we need better ways of being able to be flexible, be adaptable, and make sure that the work that we're doing, the technology that we're deploying can keep pace with the very aggressive efforts by our adversaries to compromise our networks.
Great. So can you speak a little bit to where do you envision commercial technology? You mentioned some of the large government contracts. How do you envision commercial technology playing a role especially as we move to the zero trust architecture, and how do you see that fitting?
So I think that commercial technology is going to be essential to almost every part of the technology aspects of the cybersecurity mission. It's only one part. Cybersecurity is really about solving problems. It's about deploying the right types of tools, technology, people, processes. But our commercial infrastructure, our industry is extremely strong. It is a real value add to the security of this nation. And it matters. We need good, close cooperation between the federal government and the commercial sector that's deploying the next generation of tools and technologies that will enable us to get ahead of our adversaries. I want to make sure that the government is best positioned as possible, that it's able to deploy the right tools at the right time, that we're not locked into old ways of doing business, of old programs long after they've served their useful purpose. And so I think it's a matter of how does the government work with industry to ensure that we can keep pace.
Great. And regarding some of the other recommendations from industry, and more specifically the Solarium Commission, what should we be considering that has not yet been acted upon?
Sure. I mean, there's a couple of the recommendations out of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission that are important to our agency, and I think are important to the overall cybersecurity landscape of the country. The first is a cyber response and recovery fund. We have seen support now from the Office of Management and Budget in our FY22 budget for CISA to begin the development of a cyber response and recovery fund, which would allow us to ensure that we have resources available when catastrophic cyber incidents happen. We have the resources we need to be able to respond quickly, and we are eager to work with Congress on the right way of implementing that. But there are other recommendations that are equally important. Things like, how do we establish a more joint collaborative environment for cybersecurity where we can share information with our critical interagency partners, with the private sector? How does that information come together so that we can take more effective collective action when faced with threat information, faced with critical vulnerabilities, faced with actual incidents? How are we assembling that kind of common picture, and not only a common picture, but a kind of common operating platform that we can make sure that we're taking the right action at the right time?
And following on that, since what I can say from the past few years, probably, without a doubt, I've seen an increase in collaboration among our federal customers, our government customers, especially as it relates to cybersecurity and the defense of the nation. Do you see that as a recognition that we need more centralized cyber management, or more coordination, or some form of cyber hub as a government agency to pull these things and these activities together?
Sure. So that's a really good question. I would start by noting, and I've said this before, I think that the collaboration across the federal government, particularly on the agencies that are responsible for engaging on cybersecurity issues, like the National Security Agency, like the Federal Bureau of Investigations, and CISA, the collaboration amongst those agencies is stronger than it's ever been in my 15-year history here at the department. And I think that's a testament to a lot of hard work by people across the government, recognizing the value that collaboration brings. When it comes to how are we responding as a federal government, how are we positioning ourselves to protect our networks, I do think that there is more work that needs to be done. CISA has played a leading role in helping to bring the federal civilian executive branch together to tackle cybersecurity issues more in concert. But there is a lot of space to go. I think we will see progress in the new cybersecurity executive order that the White House is finalizing now. It may actually be released before this conference actually airs. But that will highlight a number of areas where it wants the United States government to operate more in unison. That it wants to make sure that all of the agencies that are working on cyber, whether it's those that have a primary responsibility like CISA, or the agencies themselves protecting their own networks, that we're all moving in the same direction. CISA received new authorities in the National Defense Authorization Act that went into force earlier this year. That gives us some additional authorities to help the departments and agencies better secure their systems, and give CISA additional ability to have insights into the incidents that are happening across the .gov. But there's a lot more work that we need to do. And in particular, going back to one of your earlier questions, how do we take and bring to bear new technologies that will help enable both CISA and the agencies have the right level of visibility and the right ability to take action when we have threat information, when we have information on potential incidents. Right now, there are gaps, and we're working really hard across the agency to close those gaps. So I think CISA is eager to play that role in a more central role in that kind of hub and spoke model across the federal government, to make sure that the government has the information, the processes, the technology to be successful.
And I'd like to drill in. It's a great point. I'd like to drill in a little bit about the information and the dissemination you mentioned. Obviously right now you guys do a great job, and you have a lot of information that you are sharing across these different agencies. But looking towards the industry and the public partnership, both from a policy and from a data collection, how do you see that shifting or changing, or do you see a need in order to share more information with commercial partners in order to defend the country? How do you see that moving into the future?
Yeah, I think this is an excellent point. It really gets to the crux of when we talk about collective defense. I think if we've learned anything over the last 6 months with the cyber incidents that we have observed and have responded to, I think what we have learned more than anything else is the criticality of collective defense in ensuring in the cybersecurity space. We are only successful if the government and the private sector are working hand in hand to tackle these problems. I think that the government has increasingly been willing to kind of open the proverbial kimono, share more information with the private sector more quickly, bringing information down from classified channels into unclassified channels, moving information out from protected, vetted communities to be more public and open. I think you've seen this in a number of cases, starting back with the election last year, where we were able to quickly share information on attempts by both Russia and Iran to compromise election-related systems, getting that information out from highly sensitive channels all the way to public information in hours, not weeks. I think we saw this earlier this year and late last year when we were responding to the supply chain compromise at SolarWinds and the information that we were able to get out. Almost every bit of information that the federal government had on that incident, we were able to share at a public level to enable network defense across the state, local, and private sector communities. I think that there is certainly more work we can do there, but we've moved far down that path. I think we need the same from industry. I think there continues to be in some parts hesitancy about completely sharing information when there are vulnerabilities in certain critical technologies that are identified and discovered, or when there are cyber incidents that impact the private sector. There are a lot of disincentives from them from opening their kimono, sharing that information with the government, and allowing us to use that information to help protect others. Ultimately, the goal of getting that information from the private sector is not to somehow re-victimize that victim of a cyber incident. It's to take that information and make sure that we don't have a repeat of that cyber incident. We don't want any cyber incident to be more successful than once. We want to make sure we collect information from that victim and get it out to as broad a community as possible to make sure that there is protection. And so I think we need to look at ways in which, how do we make that case to the private sector? How do we make that case better? How do we enhance our value proposition to them? And ultimately, we made it to look at what other solutions there are legislatively to ensure improved information sharing when there are cyber incidents, so that the government has the right information to enable the broader security of our cyber ecosystem.
So this might be a tough question, but in that last point, do you envision, would it be, potentially easier if you got policies and laws that maybe could be changed or enacted to make it easier or required for commercial companies to share data? Do you believe that's the right approach, or how do you see that playing out? Obviously, to share information, everybody has to be comfortable with the information they're sharing and what it's being used for. How do you see that playing into the vision you just laid out?
I think ultimately that there is required legislation to correct this challenge. That without legislation, we are not going to have consistent information sharing related to cyber activity that's hitting U.S. networks that is essential to our ability to stop complex attacks from hitting our nation. And ultimately, the details need to be worked out. We're willing to roll up our sleeves and work with the Hill and work with industry to craft legislation that recognizes both the equities and needs to protect sensitive information on the private sector side, but also recognizes the criticality of getting this information into government hands to enable that broader protection. But I do think that this is an area that is ripe for legislative action, and I know that there are members on both sides of the aisle on the Hill who are interested in pursuing it, and we're ready to work with them.
I agree, and that would be a major shift. What else would you put in the category of a major shift that we need to take as a country or an industry in order to enact this vision?
Sure. And so, the other area that I'd mention, and it really builds upon some of the work that's already started. So I mentioned earlier, you've got new authorities for CISA in the National Defense Authorization Act, helping us with the ability to protect the .gov. You will see additional work for the U.S. government in the new cyber executive order, kind of pushing the U.S. government to all swim in the same direction, tackle some of the harder problems that we've not yet come together and really addressed in the past. But I do think that out of this, we need to recognize that there are some aspects of our legislation that governs the cybersecurity of the federal government, including FISMA, the Federal Information Security Modernization Act, that needs to be modernized. It is not kept pace with the nature of the threats and risks that the U.S. government faces, the complex campaigns that have targeted across the entire, across a wide variety of departments and agencies, and we know that there's again interest on the Hill in looking at how do we update and enhance FISMA, and I think that is going to be critical. I think ultimately all of this comes down to the fact that we need to begin to think about cyber in a different way. That the current approach we're taking, where we're playing somewhat whack-a-mole and dealing with cybersecurity incidents as they emerge, is not letting us get ahead of this problem. And that if we want to truly protect the networks that are most critical to the functioning of the government, that are most critical to the functioning of critical infrastructure that enables our way of life, we need to think about cyber differently. We need to think about how do we utilize the tools we have, and how do we harness both the government and the private sector to come together to do this in a unified, collective way.
And so whether you use the term active defense or defend forward, do you envision that to be another critical characteristics that we start to expand from our defensive posture? How do you see that playing?
I mean, that's a more complicated question. I would say that I don't want to speak for my fellow interagency partners that have the responsibility for defending forward. With our colleagues at the U.S. Cyber Command and elsewhere, the U.S. government's posture there has dramatically improved. We have taken a lot more aggressive stance at being able to compete with our adversaries, to defend forward, and to punch back when necessary. We've demonstrated that a number of times over the past several years, and we will continue to do so. I think in general, I put my confidence in General Nakasone and his team at Cyber Command to be able to do that, and I think that is a mission best left for the professionals there, and wouldn't want to see that expand too far into the private sector, where it would be more challenging for folks who have not yet. Who don't necessarily know how to understand all the potential downsides, the consequences, the third-party risk that would potentially engender. But I think Cyber Command has done a great job, and want to make sure that they continue to have the ability and the mandate to execute that mission for the United States.
Absolutely, fair enough. So, Brandon, you've talked a lot about what we need to go do as a country and as organizations going forward. What would you say that we should stop doing? Is there anything that we should move away from to help enable this future vision?
I think when I look at, I'll speak parochial here for a second. When I look at inside of CISA, I think the one thing we need to stop doing is I think we need to be more open about moving away from programs, from activities that are no longer providing the value at the cost that they require. And so, I mentioned this while testifying a few weeks ago. I mean, there are parts of, for example, our national cyber protection system that, in the wake of changes to network architecture, in the wake of increased use of end-to-end encrypted communications across the .gov, that there are parts of our NCPS that are growing stale and are not providing value added. We need to be willing to walk away from those and put in place the right kind of protections that can deal with modern threats and with the ways that U.S. government systems and communications networks are architected. We need to have that willingness to say, what was old is not working anymore, and we need to identify what is going to work and how do we put in place those new programs, those new tools, those new processes. And I think certainly that dialogue is happening inside of here, and I know it's happening in other agencies that we are working with. And so I think that there's a lot more across the United States government where we need to be that level of open and honest about the challenges we're facing and our willingness to do things differently.
And by the way, this may be another one. You may want to take the fifth on this, but I've always thought it was interesting. Do you think personally, do you think it's harder to start new initiatives or stop old ones? It's something that we struggle with that in industry like everybody else, but I've often wondered, what's your perspective?
I certainly in the U.S. government side, stopping something is always more challenging. Although I did say, particularly when you look at trying to deploy capabilities across an entire large federated enterprise, or you're trying to deploy technologies across, 102 federal departments and agencies, it's hard to get there. And then it's even harder to then begin to make a transition away, knowing all the work, knowing all the investment, knowing all the constituencies that have now bought into that existing approach. How do you walk away from it? And so I think, and that's why I talked up front about needing to be more nimble, needing to have more flexible programmatic architectures, needing to ensure we have the right type of procurement vehicles so that we can move and adapt and change as the adversaries change, as the infrastructure changes. And, and I think ultimately we need to make sure that security is built in up front. We need to make sure that security is not an afterthought. It's not bolted on after the fact. It's not aftermarket. It is a foundational aspect of every system design and build. What does that security architecture look like, and how do we do it in a way that's going to not only allow us to protect against today's threats, but to secure against tomorrow's as well.
So Brand, I really appreciate the time. And I guess in closing, I'd like to ask you for your closing remarks, but I'd also like to ask you a question.
Sure.
Answer. So for all the industry watching this, what can we do to help you, help CISA, help DHS on its mission for all the challenges you just laid out? Like, what can we do for you to help you be successful?
Sure. So, I'll say three quick items. First is I'd recommend that be an advocate in your community, with your stakeholders, with your vendors, with your suppliers. Be an advocate for strong cybersecurity. Because I think a lot of the companies that work with us day in and day out recognize these challenges, and they can be effective force multipliers. Second, continue to innovate. We need the private sector. That is one of our strengths as a nation, is the depth of knowledge, expertise, and innovation that comes out of our industry. And so continue to innovate, develop those next generation solutions to the challenges of the future. And third is be a willing partner. Cybersecurity is the ultimate team sport. I said it before. Collective defense is how we are going to get ahead of our adversaries. And to do that, we need people who are willing to roll up their sleeves, who are willing to partner with us, who are willing to share, recognizing that they may not get something back immediately, but they're going to benefit from the enhanced cybersecurity that we build across the entire nation. And so those are the 3 points that I would hit, and they go to you and the team you've got there at Raytheon, but it applies broadly across the breadth of the private sector across this country.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate all that very candid and direct feedback, and look forward to speaking with you again.
John, really appreciate it. Again, great dialogue, important issues for our country, and looking forward to a continued partnership. Thank you.
Brandon and John, thank you very much for that most insightful fireside chat to conclude our summit. And I just want to underline being an advocate, a willing partner, and continuing to innovate. Great suggestions to conclude our summit, as we all look forward to continuing to shift the paradigm for cybersecurity to make us all better in our nation. Thanks to each of you for listening, and to you for your continued commitment, as we all look forward to continuing this important cybersecurity education mission. Again, our deep thanks to John D. Simone and to Brandon Wales for concluding our summit so wonderfully. Thanks very much to each of you, and thanks to those of you who are listening.